Hi, everyone. This is Marilyn Bradford, and I would like to welcome you to my Left Turn podcast. What is your left turn? Writing a blog, parenting in a different way, letting go of the old because you are aware of something greater. Left turns are choices we can all make. It's about a willingness to step into the unknown in any area of your life, to trust yourself, to risk creating or trying something new. It's about letting your true uniqueness shine. The greatest people who have lived, artists, statesmen, writers, explorers, musicians, have all been people willing to turn left. What capacities do you have that you have not acknowledged? What would your life and the world be like if you were willing to turn left? Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Left Turn podcast. I'm Marilyn Bradford, and I have an absolutely awesome guest today, Christel Crawford.
Hello, hello.
Christel is a Access CF. She's an entrepreneur. She works with lots of different people, and recently has been, I'm thinking it of like the being born coach into your own reality and you, because
Yes.
she's working with a lot of people who are really deciding that they're going to make a change and they're going to step up, but you know, the way can be a little rocky. So that's a very cool specialty.
Yeah.
So thank you, Christel, and welcome today. And I'm so glad you joined us. Me.
Thank you. Thank you.
And well, let's talk about left turns. What are some of the left turns that you've made that have made such an impact? Have you ever been torn, had some pushback, and what tools would you offer people?
Do we have 4 hours? Basically, my whole life's been one big left turn. There's a couple that really stand out to me, and I'll probably tell 2 of the ones in the past and then one current. But you know, my first, it's not my first. One of my major left turns was when back in my 30s, I had grown up Christian, and I'd gone to Bible school. I'd gotten a degree in theology, and I'd then got married. And in the middle of this marriage, I was married to a guy that wasn't Christian. He had grown up Indian, dot, not feather. And so he was a seeker and very curious about lots of things. So I think that combination of having his curiosity and conversation in my world and my own kind of growing up, I read a book one day called The Sins of Scripture that started to wedge a crack into my entire belief system that I had really built my whole life around up to that point. And I can't even remember what the book said, but it was something that was so true that everything in my world started to do this and split open. You know, that thing where Jesus is the only way to God, and there's only one way to God. There was a bunch of things that started to just sort of emerge into my world as things that were pieces of true, I call them, that started to splinter that apart. And that was probably one of my first major times where I realized that if I allowed this schism to widen, that it was going to change my whole life. It was going to change the people I hung out with. It was just going to fundamentally change everything about what I was up to that point. And the hard thing about schisms is that once they've started, you can't really stop them.
Right.
Like, you're now in for a wild ride, and it's you that's just adjusting to everything that's shifted. And so it did do that. Up to that point, my whole social circle on social media and everything was Christian. My background was Christian. My mother was Christian, my mother. And so I spent probably was about 2 years just like letting that happen and not really saying much about it. I think at that point in my life, social media wasn't that big, and so I didn't have to be that vocal. You know, now we have to. That's a weird conversation, but so it was sort of private, but it changed everything. And I guess, you know, I've talked a lot about this with Marnie Richmond, with her podcast, Guilty of Heresy, because it took courage. It took I took a lot of things inside of me that I think I came in with, but I didn't know that I would need to use later. And so I guess if I were talking to anybody that's going through something like that, because that was a huge left turn. That was like,
Huge, yes.
you're just basically willing to lose everything at that point.
And everyone.
And everyone. Yeah. And you hear about this on Netflix documentary shows that talk about like the people that left the extreme religions. Like you lose everything. You lose your social circle, you lose your family, you lose the things that you knew. And for those people, they end up out in the world with nobody. For me, it was just, I had to be willing to have that power of aloneness where I didn't know where I was going next. I didn't even know what my new belief system was. I didn't know that there was a possibility of not even needing a belief system. I just knew that I couldn't keep walking the road that I was walking now. I had to walk a different road.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, I mean, the big, huge tool was just patience and allowance for myself as I went through the internal shift that was. And really just giving myself the space to go through it. I don't know if we talk enough about transitions or, big changes like that. Big changes can range in like, somebody dying, uh, divorce, that kind of schism as I talk about from old belief systems, from losing a ton of weight. Like there's so many different things that can really, really just totally transform the path that you're on. And I think we need to talk more about that of like, what kind of space do you need to be with yourself? What kind of patience do you need to have for how much that transforms how you're functioning and how you talk to yourself and what you talk to and who you talk to and, and what are the questions you can start to ask and the choices you can make to build again and choose your way forward. So
And the
yeah,
courage it takes. It
yeah,
takes the courage to do that.
yeah. And in the moment, you don't
Truly,
you
yeah.
don't even know you have courage. You don't even know that's a thing.
Yeah, right, right.
So yeah, that was probably one of my first big major left turns. And another one that was very, very pivotal was when I found access consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
That was a massive left turn. Because I wasn't really looking for a whole life and career. This is not true. I was looking for a whole life change and I was looking for a career change. I wanted to do work that was meaningful to me. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do work that had an impact on other people's lives. I also really wanted to be happy and I wanted to have good relationships. So I did want some things.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found access consciousness and I got my bars run and it was so deeply transformative, like my first session for me was so life-changing. It was pretty staggering because I hadn't up to that point really found anything where the change stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done a lot
A
of
session and then you were back.
yeah, exactly. I'd done a lot of therapy. I'd done a lot of psychiatry. I had done BIE, which is biointolerance elimination. I had done Reiki. I'd done all these things. And I'd experienced some change, but inevitably I would revert.
Mm-hmm.
And so access bars was the first time that I had done something where even a week later, I didn't revert. All those things, I had a session with a CF. So she'd done bars, but she'd also facilitated me the whole time because I was a nonstop talking machine and I was asking so many questions. So all those things that we cleared, all those things that we talked about stayed different. I was different after.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge, huge shift for me. And when I took the foundation class later, and I found out that you could do this with my life, it was this big moment where I was like, I was ready to change my life. I was ready to do something totally different. Okay, fine, let's jump in. I was just ready for a complete track change. And so that was a different kind of left turn for me. That was a left turn that I think I was ready for. I was ready for just a totally different life. I didn't want to be the person that I was before. I was ready to just throw all the babies out with all the bathwater. Like, let's just do something new. So that left turn for me was more of an embracing, yes, just yes to this. what really transformed my life was the tools for sure, but also the building of the business of being a CF. That was
Mhm.
something that I had never really done like that before. I didn't really know what it took. I didn't really necessarily have all the skills. I didn't have a lot of the education of being in business as this.
Mhm.
So that was something that transformed just how I function in my life. Like I developed new practices and new things and new skill sets. So yeah, tools out of that. My God. It's like,
I
you
think
know,
people would be really interested in that, Christel, because so many people are like, how do I build my CF business?
yeah. Well, there's man, if you are at the beginning of this and you've just said yes to this entire life change and you really want to build the business of being a change agent, being this facilitator in the world, um, I would say start somewhere. No, let's see, where do you start with this? Look at what you want your life to be like first. I think a lot of us get into this thing where we're like, I want to build a business, and that's kind of the only information we allow ourselves. But what affected the way that I built my business was what I wanted my life to be like. I
Mm,
wanted to be able to travel anywhere I wanted to travel, go to any class I wanted to take, and make money from anywhere. Those three things.
love it. Yes.
So that affected how I built my business. You can build a business in so many different ways. If you look at this brilliant creator in Hungary, Nicolette, she does a podcast that leads to a membership, that leads to bars classes, that leads to foundation classes. She has one very simple pathway for people. That's one way. You can build a bar, you can build a business in a way like my friend Paola here in Atlanta area, where she's out there just talking to people all the time. She's always on her phone. She's networking with people. She's pulling people into her classes. She's got 5 to 7 people in her classes all the time. She's happy. That's a way to build a business. But she likes being in local areas, connecting with people. She's building it in a way that works for her, that works with her life. I knew that I needed a way that was mostly virtual for the way that I wanted my life to be, because I wanted to spend most of my time transitioning from place to place and going from place to place. And there wasn't very conducive to being local.
Right, right.
So it affected what I taught myself. It affected what I got really good at. I got really good at online money systems, at online offers, at online building networks of people around the world that were consolidated in things like email lists so that I could stay connected to them in a way that allowed me location mobility.
Mhm.
So start with what do you want your life to be like and go from there. That's the biggest tool.
Oh, I think that's excellent. And you're right. Most people, okay, is there excuse me, a blueprint? I'll just follow that. But if you start with you and what you know to be true for you, that's where the rest comes out of.
Yeah, absolutely. And my latest left turn is moving from being a general access consciousness facilitator to specializing. And this is something that I think I resisted for a really, really long time. But what's affecting my choice, and I think this is important to mention about left turns. Left turns are always affected by something. They are affected by something you read or learn where your world goes whoop,
Mhm.
or some event happens outside of you. Somebody dies, somebody divorces, etc. So a child passes, whatever. Your body changes in some big way, or you need something different with your life. And my latest need, like that need and tug, like I need this to be different, is I need my business to function different. I need a different possibility for income and for growth. So what's required? So we've been really training ourselves and teaching ourselves on ways of finding new people. And one of the ways you can find new people is through targeting on ads. Well, if you're targeting people, you have to know who you're targeting and who you're talking to and like what, because you're not going to just be throwing money out into the big dark black hole of Facebook land. It's like, who's my person? Who am I speaking to? And so I started really looking at this. I'm like, I could I can do business all kinds of ways. What's going to really work for me? So what I started asking myself was, what do I naturally what am I naturally good at? What do I naturally talk about? What has my life kind of all been about? What am I great at? What do I love? And it sort of started out, my explorations sort of landed me in like, well, I love business and money. I'm like, okay, fine. So I want to tell you this whole process in a short way so you guys can sort of identify yourselves in it. I said, I was like, oh, business and money. I'm a business and money. And so anyway, I tried that on for a while. I'm like, I'm going to be a business and money mindset coach. And then changed my Instagram and it was just so weird. It was so weird. I was like, this isn't. So I was like, well, what's underneath this? Okay. So yes, I do a lot of business coaching. I talk a lot about money, but what's underneath this? What is it? What is this underneath thing? And so what started to really emerge was like, I specialize in working with people who are making a big pivot. Everybody that I work with is making a big pivot. They are either pivoting from, their current job into a new business, or they're pivoting from a marriage into a divorce, or they're pivoting from everybody I talk to is in some sort of pivot. And I was like, this is actually what I've spent my life doing.
Mm-hmm.
As a person who has been very willing to experiment, very willing to go into a lot of trial and error, I have experienced a lot of pivots. And so I'm constantly moving from like one transition to another transition to another pivot to another pivot. That's sort of just the way I live. And I was like, who better to address the pivot? And so out of that is coming the new podcast, which I'm calling Pivoting and Emerging, and the specialization of working with people that are in a big, and if you're listening to this podcast, you might be one of those people too, where you're kind of in a constant change. But not everybody is. Some
Right.
people really, really struggle with, oh my God, everything's changed. Now what? And so I think it's really brilliant to start looking, if you're listening to this, at what is really natural to you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it really natural to you to just change all the time? That's not natural to a lot of people. Like, I don't know do you know Maya Diane? Marilyn, do you know
Yes.
Maya Diane?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for those of you guys listening, Maya Diane is another certified facilitator. She's originally from Israel. She's lived in Canada, but she's lived all over. She
Yes.
literally moves house almost every single month. And she has so much ease with it. She's got 2 kids. She lives completely different.
Mm-hmm.
She has a specialty that probably isn't that recognized, that if you were to form it into something could be considered a specialty. She has a way of living that could be considered that. So that's sort of just what I started looking at and how I started approaching this latest pivot of, what would it create to change from being a generalist to a specialist? And if I were going to specialize, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And what could I call it? How could I articulate it out in the world? So those would be kind of the tools that I would use for that. So that's creating a big left turn.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
And what would you how do you help is a weird word, but how do you facilitate someone who does desire to change but is a little afraid of it? Or I think a lot of people out there actually know that their life needs to change.
Yeah.
They've been taking on everybody else's opinions and how to do it and what to believe in, and they're like, and yet they're a little, oh no. So how would you work with those people, or what tools would you give them?
Yeah.
Um,
So one of the first tools that doesn't seem like a tool that I use with people like that, if you're in that moment, is as I really go, the tool to use is you don't have to change.
I love it.
You don't have to change. Nothing has to change. Have to is not a reality.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when you make something into a have to, the only choice you give yourself is to resist it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get yourself into conflict immediately. You don't have to. None of this has to change, which I think allows the person or whoever it is to sit with, but can I live like this?
Yes. It opens possibilities.
And they start to look at it from a different angle. It's more from this calmness of, okay, I don't have to do anything. I just can.
Mm-hmm.
And so would I like to? And what starts to happen when I work with people like that, I had a lady that I worked with that was very similar. She was just in this angst of this has to change, but I can't, and all this. And that's exactly the track I took. I'm like, it doesn't have to change. You
Mm-hmm.
could, and at this time she was caring for her aging father, and it was taking up all her time. And she couldn't do anything else. Basically, it was this scenario. He was constantly demanding. She felt like she had to. She didn't want to. She wanted to build her business. So she came to me with the conflict. And I was like, well, this doesn't have to change. You
Mhm.
can be your father's caregiver for the rest of your life. And she really sat with that. She was like, no, I can't.
No can do.
Which pulled the conflict into a choice.
Yes.
So I think the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the space to not have to change anything. You are a gift exactly as you are. You've created your life the way that it is up to this moment, and it's okay. You're okay. None of this has to be different unless you want it to be different.
Mhm.
And if you were going to change it, where would you start?
That's really smart. I mean, it's like I work a lot with addiction, and I often ask my clients, what's right about your addiction you're not getting?
Yeah. Well, tell me more about that, Marilyn, because I think a lot of us get addicted to the have to of change.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, that often has an undercurrent of that's the only coping skill they have.
Yeah.
Didn't get any tools in childhood. They have a lot going on, family disruptions, maybe they lost a job, this and that, and that's the only thing they know how to do, which is to basically give themselves a space of calmness while they really absent themselves from their lives.
Yeah.
So I often end up saying things like, look, how can you stop drinking if your marriage is falling apart, your kids are acting out in school, you've got this lawsuit going on, you're heavily in debt? Let's manage the drinking so you don't do anything dangerous or hurt your body more. And sometimes I'll even recommend that people transfer their addiction to something else, because that's generally what happens with traditional treatment, going to meetings and drinking a lot of coffee or smoking.
Totally.
And let's work on other coping skills and tools so that we can address these other things that you feel like you have no power over, and that the only choice you have, once again, it's a choiceless universe,
Yeah.
is to go to whatever form of addiction you've taken on.
Yeah. So you're handling like the bleeding artery.
Yeah,
Let's cover that and get
yeah,
you to stop bleeding so that you don't die.
yeah,
And then we can start to handle the what's gotten created so far.
yes. And all the judgment of self
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
is always so big.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big left turn.
Yes, it is.
That is a big left turn to really give up what you've been using to cope and start to get present is it's a very similar moment to like the schism I was talking about where your whole belief
Yes,
system starts to fall apart and you're like, "Oh my God, am I going to survive this?"
absolutely. It's very similar.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, so amazing.
And it's a big transition. It's a transition in
Yeah.
belief systems, from letting go of belief systems and being willing to be present with what is, which seems to me exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Be present with the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking on the most recent pivot or the thing that I'm looking at now, the biggest left turn I'm making now is like, what do I want to create in the world?
Yes.
And so you kind of just move from left turn to left turn to left turn. I think that's actually living,
Yeah, I think it is too.
the left turn of like letting go of your coping mechanisms. I mean, for me, religion was definitely a coping mechanisms, but
Yes.
you don't know that's what it is when you're
No,
doing it.
you don't. You don't know there's anything else. It's an answer.
No. Yeah. And then my next coping mechanism, big one, was like relationship, and that sort of loosened. And then my next coping within relationship was reaction. So then that was a huge one.
Mhm.
And now I'm really going, okay, if what am I, if everything fell away,
Mhm.
all the things I've done, all the modalities and the things and the practices, what am I? And what do I want to create in the world?
Yes. Beautiful.
And if I could live in a world that was invented by me, what would
Mhm.
it be?
Mhm.
And that what's starting to emerge is really fun things like I would live in a world of artists. I'm like, well, just painters? No, artists. Like the lost art of communication, the lost art of relationships, the lost art of this, the lost art of that.
Yes.
I would live in a world of empowered artists. And I'm like, okay, so where can we start with this?
Yeah.
It's like,
I think you've invented a new verb, to left turn. I'm left turning, you're left turning, we're left
totally. Are you left turning? Yeah. Okay. Don't worry. We got this. There's tools for that.
Yes, exactly.
First tool, tie a knot and hold on.
Yes. And you're going to be okay.
You are going to be
choice.
okay. Yes, you have choice. And yes, your world is falling apart as you know it. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Christel. This is really a fun conversation. And if people would like to get in touch with you, how do they do?
Yeah, you can find me on social everywhere. You can find me at christeljoycrawford.com. You can find me at Christel Crawford on all the platforms. Just Google me, you'll find me. And if my website doesn't make sense to this conversation yet, just know I'm in the middle of a left turn. And
our website is Left Turning.
Yes. But yeah, everywhere on social. So
well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for joining this episode of Left Turn. I wonder what embracing left turns could create in your life. What magical possibilities might show up. Remember, when you choose left turns, you are joining a group of the most creative and brilliant people the world has ever known.